Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second lecture on an epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot by Alexander Pope. Uh, just in case my video and audio are clear, whoever is live on air, please just let me know in the chat box that you can hear me. Right. Now, in today's lecture, what we are going to look at is the first segment of the poem. And the first segment of the poem talks about Pope's Twickenham residence and the deluge of poets and wannabe poets who sort of batter down his doors. Now, we will take a look, of course, at some of the issues that I've raised. Point number one, how it is written in imitation of Horace. Two, what kind of a satire is it? Three, what are the major points that Pope is trying to make in this satire? So, without further ado, let me share the text with you so that we can talk about this as we sort of read the poem proper. Right, this is the epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. I hope the text is visible. Right. So, Pope begins this with a quotation from Tully. And the quotation says, and I'm giving you, this is Neque Sermonibus Vulgi Generis Te, that's the Latin quote. I will, of course, translate it for you in English. It says, "You will not longer attend to the vulgar mob's gossip, nor put your trust in human rewards for your deeds. Virtue, through her own charms, should lead you to true glory. Let what others say about you be their concern. Whatever it is, they'll tell it anyway." So this is from Cicero, and it is taken from De Re Publica. So Pope is suggesting, or through this quotation, he's saying that his critics will attack him. But despite all these attacks, he must continue with his own work without any kind of remorse or any kind of disdain, and his path will be the path of truth. So the moral quality of the satire, as we saw in our last class, that satire is meant for public correction, and that the only truth that the satirist has is public improvement without any personal sort of stake within the satire. That is what this quotation is meant to be as a superscript. Pope goes on to say, "This paper is a sort of bill of complaint, begun many years since and drawn up by snatches." So it is as it were written piecemeal. And I was saying in my last class that this is probably the only kind of autobiographical poetic memoir that Alexander Pope had written. And he suggests that it was written by to attack in a very extraordinary manner when he was attacked by a nobleman. Now, you must learn this history, or you must know this history. I suggested in the earlier class that Pope was bitterly attacked by his critics. But among two of his most vehement critics was, of course, Lord Harvey. Now, Lord Harvey attacked not only Pope, but Pope's parents as well in a bitter satire, and also Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, Montagu and Pope were good friends, but they fell out, and Lady Mary Wortley Montagu later on attacked Pope bitterly. So when Pope refers to the nobleman at Hampton Court, he is referring to Lord Harvey. And he says that Harvey attacked him not only for my writings, but my person, morals, and family. Whereof to those who know me not, a truer information may be requisite. So Pope is saying, I need to define who I am. Right, now you will see, or many of you will find in your future careers that, when people cannot attack you professionally, they attack you personally. So it becomes slander and libel. So Pope faced that, and therefore he's suggesting that he needs to give a better account of himself. Being divided between the necessity to say something of myself and my own laziness to undertake so awkward a task, I thought it the shortest way to put the last hand to this epistle. So the epistle is not only about Arbuthnot. The epistle is actually about Pope. Arbuthnot is the point of entry through which Pope will talk about his poetic career, his enemies, and Arbuthnot will come in only incidentally. এটা কিন্তু একটু মাথায় রেখো তোমরা যে পোপের এই কবিতাটা এত ইম্পর্টেন্ট because this is where Pope is actually bearing himself. Bearing মানে খুলে দেখাচ্ছেন নিজের জীবনের চালচিত্রটা. If it have anything pleasing, it will be that by which I am most desirous to please the truth and the sentiment. If anything offensive, it will be only to those I am at least sorry to offend, the vicious and the ungenerous. So he's suggesting that I am for truth, and my enemies are vicious, and they will be negated. And he says, I have at most part spared their names. Very important that he has gone in the way of moderation. He has not named them directly, but indirectly referred to the Latin types. এটাও কিন্তু তোমাদের একটু ভালো করে দেখতে হবে যে পোপের গ্যালারি অফ ক্যারেক্টার্স, যেটা নিয়ে তোমাদের মেইন প্রশ্নটা আসবে. I am speaking to all concerned that the gallery of characters not only names, sort of suggests individuals, but the richness of the poem lies in the fact that these characters are also types of human beings. অর্থাৎ প্রত্যেকে মানে পোপ কিন্তু আক্রমণ করছেন, কিন্তু তাদের ডিরেক্টলি নামটা দিচ্ছেন না. He's obliquely referring to them through a Latin name and therefore attacking not only the individual but the type. এখানেই কিন্তু হোরেশিয়ান স্যাটায়ার, যে কবিতাটার স্যাটায়ারটা অনেক বেশি ওয়াইড স্প্রেড, মানে কারোর ব্যক্তি কেন্দ্রিক আক্রমণ কিন্তু নয়. I would have some of them know, owing to the request of the learned and candid friend to whom it was inscribed, this is Arbuthnot, that I make not as free use of theirs as they have of mine. মানে এরা আমায় যেরকম আক্রমণ করেছে আমি সেরকম করি. I have not attacked them in the way that they have attacked me. However, I shall have this advantage, that whereas by their proceedings any abuse may be directed at any man, no injury can be possibly be done by mine. So he says, I have not injured anybody. So you see, this is the difference between the Horatian and the Juvenalian modes of satire, that Pope is not directly attacking any individual. So let us come to the text now. An epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. An epistle is a letter. In this particular case, there's a certain use of a first person intimate tone to the reader and to the person addressed. But remember that the satire is formal. এটা কিন্তু মাথায় রাখবে যে সাটায়ারটা কিন্তু is a formal satire. Shut the door, good John. John refers to Pope's servant. If you look at the opening of Arbuthnot, you will see how dramatically it begins. Almost in medias res. Dorja bondo koro, dorja bondo koro. He's saying to his servant. And immediately it attracts the audience. Fatigued, I said, tie up that knocker. What is a knocker? তখনকার দিনে তো you don't have a calling bell. So you have a knocker. So that somebody is alerted that somebody is at the gate. Now, I'm sick. Say I'm sick, I'm dead. The dog star rages. The dog star refers to Sirius. Sirius is seen in mid-August, when it was normally time when the poets read their satires in Rome. অর্থাৎ Sirius is the star of the poets, and everybody, it seems, wants to read their poetry to Pope. গতদিন যে কথাটা বলেছিলাম, I think you remember what I said yesterday or the last class, is that Horace had withdrawn to the countryside, in his countryside home. He was the primary poet, premier poet, and everybody came to Horace to show their poetry. Similarly, Pope is taking up the guise of the premier poet of England, which he was, and everybody is coming to show their poetry to Pope, and especially poor poets. You see, এই সময়কার কবিতায় there is this careful distinction between good poetry and bad poetry. The good poet is seen as the bee, অল্প লেখে ভালো লেখে. Bad poet is seen as the spider, spins garbage. ভালো কবি, near the center. Bad poet, part of Grub Street, vulgar. Therefore, Pope is suggesting that he's inundated by bad poets trying to show him their poetry because he's the numero uno, the number one poet of England. Then it is past doubt. All Bedlam or Parnassus is let out. Bedlam ki chilo? Bedlam was the hospital of Saint Bethlehem, which was the madhouse of the Pawalder Hashpatal. Our Parnassus was the mountain of poetry of the muse. So, it is as it were everybody is writing, whether it be the inferior poet, the mad poet, good poet. So everybody is writing when Sirius is out, and everybody is coming to Pope. Fire in each eye and papers in each hand, they rave, recite, and madden round the land. অর্থাৎ সবাই কবিতা লিখছে, everybody is writing poetry, everybody is wanting to show their poetry to Pope. So quite obviously, there's a degree of hyperbole here. Hyperbole ki? Figure of speech, which is exaggeration. And what is the exaggeration doing? The exaggeration has established Pope as the premier poet of England, and that every poet wants to be there. অর্থাৎ কবিতায় এই dramatic beginningটা, what is it doing? It is turning the spotlight on Pope, the great poet. দেখো কিভাবে পোপ নিজের দিকে আকর্ষণটা, অ্যাটেনশনটা টেনে নিচ্ছে. What else can God mean? Me, I, এই জিনিসটা একটু দেখতে চেষ্টা করো. What shades can hide? মাথায় রেখো, Pope's house is located on the banks of the river Thames, across the city of London. Catholicsরা কিন্তু লন্ডন শহরে বেশি থাকতো না. Pope was a Roman Catholic, therefore he was almost barred from the court. And Pope therefore lived at Twickenham. At Twickenham, Pope's house had a cave, underground cave, which he called his grotto. Now, I went to Twickenham. Uh, Whenever I go to England, I try and visit one 18th century monument. So I went to this house of Pope, and unfortunately, it has become now a school. And they were highly surprised to find somebody from India who had come to see Pope's house. And when I asked them about the grotto, they said it's still there. You can go and see it. So I actually went to Pope's grotto, not with papers in my hand or poetry, he's long dead, but to pay my homage. But then these are people who are coming to him with their poetry. By land, by water, they renew the charge. By water, because they are crossing the Thames. They stop the chariot and they board the barge. No place is sacred. Not the church is free. So church dhao korche. Even Sunday shines. No Sabbath day to me. রোববারেও আমার কোনো ছাড়ার নেই। Then from the mint কেন? Because many people who were offenders, they would go and stay in the mint. Minte থাকলে you could not be arrested. So these offenders are coming from the mint to meet him. Walks forth the man of rhyme, happy to catch me just at dinner time. অর্থাৎ দিনে হোক রাতে হোক সবাই আমার কাছে আসছে কবিতা নিয়ে। Is there a parson much bemused in beer? The Pope is here referring in this bemused in beer to the poet Lawrence Euston, poet laureate who was always drunk. Right, so is there a parson much bemused in beer and who had attacked Pope? So Pope is referring to this poet laureate who was always drunk, Euston. A modeling poetess, কে আসছে? A poet laureate, a modeling poetess, অল্প বয়সী একজন poetess, a rhyming peer, একজন lord, peer is a lord, a clerk, from all classes, from all genders, foredoomed his father's soul to cross, who pens a stanza when he should engross. ক্লার্কের কাজ ছিল তখনকার দিনে কপি করা, লং হ্যান্ডে কপি করা ডকুমেন্টস। বলছে তুমি কপি করছো না, you're not copying documents, but the clerk is writing poetry. So everybody seems to be bitten by the poetic bug, as it were. Is there who locked from ink and paper scrawls with desperate charcoal round his darkened walls? অর্থাৎ কেউ যদি কাগজপত্র না পায়, কাগজ কলম, then he writes on the walls of his prison. Even the prisoner is writing poetry on the walls with charcoal. All fly to Twickenham, and in humble strain apply to me to keep them mad or vain. So everybody comes to me so that they can still feel very proud that Pope has recommended their poetry. Ki hobe? The Pope jodi recommend kore, if Pope recommends, then the publishers will publish their poetry. So everybody comes to Pope and says, আমাকে একটা forward লিখে দাও. Arthur, whose giddy son neglects the laws. Now, এখানে দেখো, Pope is referring to James Moore Smith, who was the son of Arthur Moore, who had stolen some of Pope's verses in his play, The Rival Ladies. অর্থাৎ এই জেমস মুর যে সে পোপের কিছু কবিতা চুরি করে নিয়েছিল, প্লেজিয়ারাইজ করা যাকে বলে, and used them in his own plays. So Pope was extremely upset with him. Pope বলছে ওই জেমস মুরের বাবা সেও আমাকে দোষী ঠায়। কেন? Arthur, whose giddy son neglects the laws. Giddy son, stupid son, neglects the laws, who's breaking the laws by plagiarizing, imputes to me and my damned works the cause. অর্থাৎ তোর বাবা বলছি পোপের জন্যই সব, বলে না সব বেটাকে ছেড়ে ওই বেটাকে ধর। So Pope is being sort of blamed for everything that is happening. Poor Cornus sees his frantic wife elope and curses wit and poetry and Pope. Cornus is a cuckold, মানে হর্ন থেকে আসে, কাকোল্ডের মাথায় হর্ন থাকতো, কাকোল্ড is whose wife was having an affair. So poor Cornus sees his frantic wife, frantic in the sense who's sexually very active, and curses wit and poetry and Pope. অর্থাৎ যার যা চলে যাচ্ছে, কারো ছেলে খারাপ হয়ে যাচ্ছে, কারো বউ পালিয়ে যাচ্ছে, সবাই বলছে কার দোষ? পোপের দোষ, right? So once again you see a series of exaggerations that Pope is using, but the exaggeration is all the while trying to suggest that it is Pope to whom everybody turns. It is to Pope's house that everybody comes. And that Pope is the poet whom, everything or everybody turns to for inspiration, for a foreword, for a recommendation, and so on and so forth. Friend to my life. Now, this is to Arbuthnot, or that he's addressing now Arbuthnot, who was, as I told you, he was also a physician to the Queen and a very dear friend of Pope. So, friend to my life, which did not you prolong, I'm sorry. The world had wanted many an idle song. So, যদি তুমি আমাকে বাঁচিয়ে না রাখতে, and I remind you that Pope was very sick. He was suffering from many diseases. So Arbuthnot was a very dear friend, somebody who's very critical to his needs. And he says that because you had prolonged my life, therefore the world can listen to my songs. What drop on nostrum? Nostrum is secret medicine. Can this plague remove? Which plague? The plague of poetry. অর্থাৎ এই ছোঁয়াচে রোগ, প্লেগটা তো খুব ছোঁয়াচে রোগ ছিল। পোপ বলছে এই কবিতার ছোঁয়াচে লোকটাকে কোন ওষুধ দ্বারা কিওর করা যায়? Or which must end me, a fool's wrath or love? A dire dilemma. Either way I'm sped, either way I'm spent. If foes they right, if friends they read me dead. তো বন্ধু হোক, শত্রু হোক, সবাই আমার কাছে আসছে কবিতা শোনাতে। Seized and tried down to judge how wretched I, who can't be silent and who will not lie. So Pope says I'm an honest critic, so I cannot lie. I will tell them what their poetry is like. To laugh were one with goodness and grace, and to be grave exceeds all power of face. I sit with sad civility, and Pope is posing himself as this victim who is forced to read all this poetry because he's a gentleman. I sit with sad civility, I read with honest anguish and an aching head. অর্থাৎ আমার মাথা ব্যথা করলেও আমি পড়ে যাই। And drop at last, but in unwilling years, this saving counsel, keep your peace 9 years. In 9 years is important because in Ars Poetica, this is what Horace tells budding poets, that revise and revise your poetry and keep it 9 years before publishing. So Pope offers the same advice to all young poets, that you should keep your peace 9 years. 9 years, cries he, who high in Drury Lane. Drury Lane was the place where the opera was located. So 9 years, cries he, who high in Drury Lane, lulled by soft zephyrs, winds through the broken pane, rhymes ere he wakes. So he's marked by poverty. Actorsরা কিন্তু poor ছিল, so broken panes দিয়ে হাওয়া ঢুকছে, সে সকালবেলা উঠেই কবিতা লিখতে শুরু করেছে। And prints before the term ends, অর্থাৎ সিজন এন্ড করার আগে তাকে ছাপতে হবে। Obliged by hunger and by request of friends, the piece you think is incorrect, why take it? I am all submission. What you'd have it, make it. So they tell Pope that even if it's incorrect, you can edit them. আমি জানি না ছাত্ররা যারা তোমরা আছো তাদের এরকম কোনো কবিতা পাগল বন্ধু আছে কিনা, যারা কবিতা লেখে ছটফট করে অন্যকে শোনাতে, ছাপাতে। আমার সময় এরকম এক কবি বন্ধু ছিল, যে প্রায়শই রোজ আমাকে পাকড়াও করতো, কারণ সে ভাবতো আমি খুব কবিতা ভালো বুঝি। ননসেন্স, অফ কোর্স, আই ডিডন্ট আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড এনিথিং, এন্ড হি রোট অ্যাবিসমাল পোয়েট্রি, অত্যন্ত খারাপ পোয়েট্রি। কিন্তু আমি পোপের মতো তার কবিতা পড়তাম না, আমি তাকে বলতাম চলো শোনাবে চলো, and I would often take him to a restaurant where he would read his poetry and I would feast on him. But anyways, কবির পকেটে রেস্ত ছিল, বাট অধিকাংশ কবিদের পকেটে রেস্ত থাকে না, সো don't try the trick very often. You might end up actually spending money on feeding the poet. Anyways, so 9 years, cries he. So 3 things another's modest wishes bound. অর্থাৎ তারা কি চায় কবির কাছ থেকে? My friendship, কবির বন্ধুত্ব, a prologue which would recommend it, মানে বড় কবি লিখে দিলে পাবলিশাররা ছাপবে, and 10 pound as subscription for buying that volume of poetry. এই সময় মাথায় রেখো প্লিজ that all printing was done by subscription, so তুমি আগে সাবস্ক্রিপশনটা জোগাড় করতে for your book of poetry, and then only would the publisher print. অর্থাৎ তুমি পাবলিশারকে নিয়ে গিয়ে পয়সাটা দিলে তবেই পাবলিশার would print it. Pitholion sends to me, you know your grace, I want a patron. I want a patron, ask him for a place. Annotation say, Pope writes that the name Pitholion was taken from a foolish poet at Rhodes who pretended much to Greek. Now, Pitholion here refers to, মানে অর্থাৎ is a false person who claims false knowledge. This refers to one of Pope's particular enemies, Richard Bentley. Richard Bentley was one of Pope's great critics who sort of criticized his edition of Horace, and therefore Pope is satirizing Bentley, through this name Pitholion. Pitholion libelled me. So Pitholion takpore take chaiche, after having written satires against Pope, you know his grace, his lordship, who can offer him a patronage. I want a patron, ask him for a place. এই সময় তখন patronage ছিল, so you could not survive by writing poetry only, so you needed a patron who would support you. So পোপ অনেক লর্ডদের চিনতেন, তাই বেন্টলি এসে বলছে তুমি অমুক লর্ডকে চেনো, আমাকে একটুখানি পেট্রনেজ দিয়ে দাও। Pitholion libelled me. পোপ বলছেন আগেও আমাকে স্যাটারাইজ করেছিল, but here's a letter informs you, sir, it was when he knew no better, so he's now apologizing. Dare you refuse him? Curl invites to dine. Curl was one of his publishers. He'll write a journal or he'll turn divine. So ওকে রিফিউজ করলেই ও আবার তোমাকে ক্রিটিসাইজ করবে। Bless me, it is a packet. So এর মধ্যে আরেকটা প্যাকেট চলে এসছে। So you see this kind of dramatic kind of moment when packets, people come fast and thick. It is a stranger Seuss. Seuss is in the sense a virgin tragedy, an orphan muse. If I dislike it, furies, death and rage আমার উপর ক্ষিপ্ত হয়ে যাবে. If I approve, commend it to the stage. পাঠিয়ে দাও আমাকে, recommend it to the stage for performance. There thank my stars, my whole commission ends. The players and I luckily are no friends. অর্থাৎ আমার স্টেজে কোনো বন্ধুত্ব নেই, so I cannot do anything more. Fired that house that reject him's death, I'll print it and shame the fools. Your interest, sir, with Lintot. Lintot was Pope's publisher at one point of time, and who had, of course, again published his unauthorized editions. So he had published Pope's unauthorized editions as well. Lintot, dull rogue, will think your price too much. Lintot bolbe je tomar mane you cannot be paid so much. Not, sir, if you revise it and retouch. So there's another request that is made to Pope, not only to read it, to recommend it, but also to redo it, to edit it. All my demurs and double his attacks, at last he whispers, do and we go snacks. Arthat do and we share the profits. We do go snacks, mane hocche share the profits. So if you forward it to him and edit it, we will share the profits made on it. Glad of a quarrel, straight I clap the door. Sir, let me see your works, and you no more. 'Tis sung when Midas's years. Now, the reference is, of course, to the Metamorphoses, where you have the story of King Midas, whose years who had begun to spring years, and whose wife could not actually and whose barber could not actually hold this. Therefore, he whispered it to somebody. So, Pope says, "'Tis sung when Midas's years began to spring." Midas, a sacred person and a king. His very minister who spied them first, some say his queen, was forced to speak or burst. And is not my friend a sorer case, when every coxcomb perks them in my face? So I am like coxcomb, I'm like Midas. I'm waiting to tell you how Pope amader bolchen, dekho amar koto koshto. He's trying to show his agony towards us. So all this is hyperbole, dramatic hyperbole, which is telling us how popular Pope is, how many people want him to see their poems, how many people want him to write a prologue. So the entire poem is now about Pope and his position of preeminence in the world of 18th century poetry. Good friends, for beer, you deal in dangerous things. I'd never name queens, ministers, or kings. Eta kintu kar voice? Arbuthnot. Arbuthnot is cautioning him that do not name anybody in power. Keep close to ears and let those asses prick. It is nothing if they bite and kick. Pope জিজ্ঞাসা করছেন, এরা তো আমাকে, they are hurting me. Why should I ignore them? Out with it, Dunciad. And what does Pope do? He writes a satire against all his enemies, creating a book of dunces, fools. And there he is writing a Juvenalian satire to demolish all of them. Out with it, Dunciad. Let the secret pass. That secret to each fool, that he is an ass. So that is Pope's way of revenge in ridiculing his enemies. The truth told, and wherefore should we lie? The queen of Midas slept, and so may I. So Pope was extremely agonized by the attacks against him. So he let out all his satire, and then he could rest peacefully as the queen of Midas after revealing the secret. You think this cruel? This, that writing a satire against your enemies is cruel? You think this? Take it for a rule. No creature smarts so little as a fool. So he says, fools have very thick skins, they don't care. Let peals of laughter, Codrus. Now, when Pope refers to Codrus, he says, Codrus is a conventional name for a poet. So let peals of laughter, Codrus, round thee break. Thou unconcerned canst hear the mighty crack. অর্থাৎ পোয়েটরা কিচ্ছু শুনতে পায় না, ওদের চামড়া ভীষণ মোটা, and they do not mind it. Pit, box, and gallery in convulsions heard. So what if they are ridiculed in the stage? Thou standest unshook amidst a bursting world. Who shames a scribbler? Break one cobweb through. He spins the slight, self-pleasing thread anew. Pope is suggesting that poets will write about themselves over and over again. So even if you criticize them once, doesn't matter. They will come back. So, who shames the scribbler? Break one cobweb through. He spins the slight, self-pleasing thread anew. Destroy his fib. Fib is lies or sophistry. Sophistry is false art. This creature's at his dirty work again, thrown in the case of his thin designs, proud of a vast extent of flimsy lines. বলছে যতই আমি বলি কি না কেন, যতই ওদের লজ্জা দিই না কেন, এরা নির্লজ্জ. They will never improve. They will never be influenced by it. Whom have I hurt? এইবার Pope is going on a different track. He's saying, why am I so much attacked? Whom have I hurt? আমি কাকে আক্রমণ করেছিলাম? Has poet yet or peer lost the arched eyebrow or Parnassian sneer? And has not Collie still his lord and whore? This is, আমার রাইভালরা তো সবাই স্ব জায়গায়, they are well established. So Collie refers to Collie Cibber, who was his chief, Dunes in the Dunciad, his chief enemy who had attacked his edition of Shakespeare, and who was also a poet laureate. So Pope had attacked Collie Cibber as the king of the Duneses. So has not Collie still his lord and his whore? Which I mean, Collie Cibberer to সব কিছুই আছে. He has his lord, he has his whore. Has not his butchers Henley, his Freemasons more? Henley refers to John Henley, a preacher who had delivered a sermon on butchers. So he says, and once again, who had attacked Pope as well. So Pope is attacking all his enemies. He's saying, এরা তো সবাই বহাল তবিয়তে আছে, they are fine. Not one table Bavius still admit? Bavius is a poet who had attacked Horace and Virgil. Still to one Bishop Phillips seems a wit. Now this refers to Ambrose Phillips, a poet who often attacked Pope and was attacked by Pope. So Ambrose Phillips, still to one Bishop Phillips seems a wit. So Bishop Phillips is superbly foolish, yet to some people he offers to be extremely witty. Still Sappho. And Sappho will refer to Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Now, Sappho was, of course, a poet of Lesbia in Greece, who was also, the author of lesbian poetry. And therefore, whenever Pope is using her name or his name, it signifies Lady Wortley Montagu, who was extremely powerful. And immediately there is the voice of Arbuthnot, অর্থাৎ দেখো একটা ডায়ালগ হচ্ছে যেন, hold, nay see you, you'll offend, no names, be calm, listen, learn prudence of a friend. So Arbuthnot is not only important because he saved Pope's life, but also because he's offering him the advice that satire should not directly attack, but attack obliquely. I too could write, and am twice am tall, but foes like this, one flatterer worse than all. Of all mad, of all mad creatures, if the learned are right, it is the slaver kills and not the bite. A fool quite angry is quite innocent. Alas, till 'tis 10 times worse when they repent. এবার পোপ বলছেন যে যারা আমাকে আক্রমণ করেছে, যারা বোকা, তারা একরকম, but those who are praising me and who are writing bad poetry are even worse. One dedicates, so this is to his fans who do not understand him, one dedicates in high heroic prose and ridicules beyond 100 foes. So tar praise-tao is, ridiculous. One from all Grub Street will my fame defend. Once again, this reference to Grub Street, the seat of poor poetry. And more abusive calls him my friend. This prints my letters, that expects a bribe. Now, please remember that, this refers to Edmund Curl, who had published a pirated copy of Pope's poetry. And that expects a bribe, and others roar aloud, subscribe, subscribe. অর্থাৎ আমাদের কবিতা সাবস্ক্রাইব করো, সাবস্ক্রিপশন দাও, পয়সা দিয়ে আমাদের কবিতা কেনো। There are who to my person pay their court. So some people come and praise me in person. I cuff like Horace, and though lean am short. So he says once again, like Horace, they come to meet me, but I am very short, unlike Horace. He was, as I said, 4'6" tall, and he suffered from tuberculosis of the spine. So he often referred to this long disease, my life. পোপকে দেখতে অত্যন্ত কুৎসিত ছিল, হাঞ্চব্যাকড হয়ে থাকতেন, অত্যন্ত ব্যথা বেদনায় ভুগতেন। So Pope often referred to, his condition. And he says, ওরা আমার সঙ্গে হরেসের মতো দেখা করতে আসে, কিন্তু হরেসের, unlike Horace, I am very short. Annon's great shoulder, one Annon's great son, one shoulder had too high. This is Alexander. And Ovid's nose. And sir, you have an eye. So ওরা তাকে বিভিন্ন লোকের সঙ্গে তুলনা করে. They praise him as the great poets. And he does not like flattery. Pope is suggesting that the good poet will not like flattery. Go on, obliging creatures, make me see all that disgraced my betters met in me. Say for my comfort, languishing in bed, just so immortal Marrow is Virgil, held his head. ওকে যারা তেল মারতে আসে, মানে স্তাবক যারা, who want to praise him, who are his followers, as it were, blind followers, without rhyme or reason, who praise him so that he can recommend him. They praise him, and Pope says, I want to dismiss all of them. And when I die, be sure you let me know, great Homer died 3,000 years ago. So when he will be dead, they will compare him with the great Homer. But he says, I don't want praise from these people because they do not understand my poetry. Right. We will stop here for the time being, but let me make a point. What has Pope done in the first 124 odd lines in the poem? The poem has begun dramatically. And Pope has suggested that all the poets are rushing, all the poets in England are rushing to his Twickenham residence, where they're badgering him to read their poetry because he is the greatest poet of his generation, like Horace. So point number one, he is great, like Horace. Point number two, like Horace, he is one for truth. He will not lie. So he will be clear about the quality of the poetry. 3, he makes a distinction between good poetry and bad poetry, good poets and fools. 4th, he says that the good poet should not be swayed by enmity. The good poet should not be swayed by praise. He must make a critical judgment based on the quality of the poem. So what has Pope done? Pope has carefully built himself up as the ideal poet and critic, who is the preeminent poet of England and who is actually sort of the greatest critic because he is extremely frank and he is extremely straightforward. In the process, what has Pope done? Pope has created a gallery of characters. Who are these characters? The rival poets, Colley Cibber, for example, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, for example. He has referred to his publishers, Lintott and Kern. He has referred to all the people who have attacked him in various forms. Right. Therefore, the poem is important because Pope is describing his selfhood and is also describing the people who are sort of criticizing him, his enemies. But remember, following Arbuthnot, he has not directly named these poets. He has only obliquely referred to them. So this is the line of moderation that Arbuthnot has asked him to take and that Pope is following. I'll stop sharing at this point of time because this is as much as we can cover at this particular moment. I see that a lot of you have tuned in. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the next class. If there are any questions of this class, put that question in the chat box immediately when I begin my lecture. Right? Now, we come back with the next 150 odd lines of the poem tomorrow. And here, in these next 150 lines, Pope will talk about his life, his parents, and his, let us say, his justification for his writing his poetry. I hope you found this useful. The edition that I've used is Jack Lynch's edition, Lynch, and you can find it on the internet. All the annotations are also given there. So you can check these annotations out. And I'll expect that those of you who have listened to it carefully, will go back and once again give it one more hearing. And for those who will tune in later on, please read the first 150 lines of the poem carefully. I wish all of you a very good night. And remember, we come back tomorrow exactly at 7 o'clock in the evening. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and I'll be logging off now. Thank you very much for your patience.